Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Shunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine. So we had left off on Friday where Prabhupada was ending his brief discussion of Mahaprabhu's talks with Ramananda Roy, and Prabhupada said these talks are very elevated and they require more education to go further. So we had discussed that at length about what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, why those talks were considered very elevated. And we got off on many tangents of interesting and controversial topics, which is kind of normal. I like to do that because I think if something's controversial, it's generally not only interesting, but it's important to understand, and it means there's some lack of clarity, or it means that there's various opinions, perhaps both valid, and we need to understand how to find a balance between them. So that's what we did last week more than read, if you remember, right? Didn't we? So we're going to continue reading that, and we will also do kirtan. I'm just going to bring up that document so I will be ready. We're having today a conversation at 1:30 Eastern Time about the film Road to Vrindavan, which is a film about the lack of education and its consequences for girls in India, but it's indicative of the world, but particularly in India, with highlighting on the school run by Food for Life in Vrindavan. And we're going to have, last time we had a discussion without, I don't remember if any women participated. Now we have women. Mother Vishaka is going to be there. Kalakanta's daughter, Kalakanta Prabhu, our godbrother, his daughter is going to be there, Lakshmi. And I will be there, and the filmmaker will be there, and Saradiya from South Africa will be moderating. So that's going to be interesting, and perhaps in today's discussions, some of those topics may come up. Now, I am looking to see where we left off. I need help here. Trying to get to the point of, I should do all this before class, right? So it's kind of, I just like to study in the morning, and I study up to the last moment, then I rush down here. And then I'm usually not prepared. If I was in my office studying, then I would be more prepared. Okay, so I'm getting closer. Now I've got to Ramananda Roy's discussion, and I want to get to the last paragraph we read. Yeah, okay, I found it. So we can do a small kirtan, and then we'll start class. Krishna Kirtana Ganana Sanapuro See Krishna is another thing I should be preparing for, right? I should be doing this all before, right? So you don't have to sit here and watch me hit buttons, which you always get to watch. I don't know, maybe you like watching me hit buttons. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Go Premanande, Hare Hare Om. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So nice that you're all here. I was going to say nice to see all of you. I can only see your names, and that's only the ones who have written comments. So on Zoom, I can say nice to see all of you, but also on Zoom, not everyone shows themselves. So, but I will say nice to see all of you this morning for our continued process of hearing and chanting, which is an essential practice of Krishna consciousness, right? Trying to get my head not in front of Prabhupada. How do we do that? Remove the camera. Oh yeah, just see I'm moving without moving. Beautiful. Okay. So I just want to read what we read yesterday, on Friday, the last paragraph, which provoked a lot of discussion, and we only read this one paragraph. Above these topics discussed by the Lord and Sri Ramananda Roy, there were still more elevated spiritual talks between the two great personalities, and we purposely withhold those topics for the present because one has to come to the spiritual plane before further talks with Ramananda can be heard. We have presented further talks of Srila Ramananda Roy with the Lord in another book, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So in other words, there's more explanation that's required, more foundational knowledge, if one is going to understand the position of the gopis. And I think subsequently, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but I think subsequently, I heard a discussion with Srila Prabhupada, and somebody was asking him about some intimate topic, Swarup, one's eternal relationship with Krishna, and what if one is a gopi, but then this, and he thinks that way, and how does one know who he is, and what is our position? And Prabhupada said, your Swarup is you're a rascal, because you're asking all these questions you're not qualified to ask. So your constitutional position is that of a rascal. So sometimes these questions would be asked. Prabhupada would say, just chant Hare Krishna. And don't worry about it. It's beyond your pay level, basically. So that's the point Prabhupada's making here, that if we're going to understand the position of the gopis, we're going to need to know a lot more. And I think our discussion, as I remember, was about becoming qualified to be able to understand the position of the gopis, which also meant not trying to imitate a gopi or Krishna. So we will continue reading. To remind everyone, we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, a life sketch. In the beginning of the Bhagavatam, first canto, there's a life sketch of Mahaprabhu. And we started reading this just before Gaur Purnima, and we decided we would continue discussing Mahaprabhu. It's kind of a spontaneous thing. It wasn't really spontaneous. It's natural to read before Gaur Purnima, but to continue reading this long, we thought, well, let's just continue the meditation. At the conclusion of this meeting, Sri Ramananda Roy was advised by the Lord to retire from service and come to Puri, so that they could live together and relish a transcendental relationship. Sometime later, Sri Ramananda Roy retired from the government service and took a pension from the king, because the king was a devotee, so he was very happy to let him retire. He returned to his residence in Puri, where he was one of the most confidential devotees of the Lord. There was another gentleman at Puri of the name Shiki Mahiti, who was also a confidant like Sri Ramananda Roy. The Lord used to hold confidential talks on spiritual values with 3 or 4 companions at Puri, and he passed 18 years in that way in spiritual trance. So Mahaprabhu, his internal mission was to try to understand and experience the position of Radha, understand her love, her ecstasy, the charm she feels for him, and that's what he was doing in Puri. And he was surrounding himself with these intimate associates who were the chief gopis. So they understand Radharani's mood, and they helped him to understand it. And it's so interesting that sometimes in Leela, Krishna doesn't understand something because he doesn't, it's not going to help the Leela. It would help that he doesn't understand. But in this case, he actually didn't understand. Her love is not understandable to him. And the only way he could understand it was to take her position. So and this was obviously a new position, a new task. And so he needed the help of the principal gopis to be able to do that. And so he surrounded himself with these associates who could help him. His talks were recorded by his private secretary, Sri Damodar Goswami, that's Sri Damodar, one of the four most intimate devotees. And this is how, these biographers, Krishnadas Kaviraj wrote Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he gets biographies from Swarup Damodar's. He got Swarup Damodar's notes, as I remember. So these things were described by Swarup Damodar, and you can read about them in later parts of Chaitanya Charitamrita, and it's Mahaprabhu experiencing intense feelings of separation, as Radharani experienced when Krishna was out of Vrindavan. And as we know, and as we've discussed, and as we know is somewhat difficult to understand, what appears externally to be very painful was very, very blissful. So it appears that Mahaprabhu was somewhat crazy and somewhat crazy in pain, but that actually was ecstasy. And there are certain things we're never going to understand. We can observe them and we can discuss them, but they're not really understandable unless we have the experience. So this is one of them. And the emotion that Mahaprabhu is experiencing is called Mahabhav, great emotion, which is like the Mount Everest of prema. It's the pinnacle of prema, and that is very rarely achieved. It is something that Radharani experiences, Mother Yasoda also. Mahaprabhu is exhibiting this. It's not common devotees do not experience this level of prema. And so because it's so exalted, so intense, so are the feelings of separation, because where love is intense, separation is intense. Sometimes we read, somebody dies, we knew them, we saw them, but we weren't really friends. I was like, oh, that's too bad. It doesn't really give us much pain or sorrow because we had no real interaction. But if that was your best friend, then it's going to be very painful. So as your love increases, then separation, pain of separation increases. And Prabhupada said that separation is better because separation increases meditation, just like when everyone's meditating on Pankajangri. So probably before he was sick, you probably really weren't thinking about him unless you live in Mayapur. But now everyone's thinking about him, and everyone's benefiting by thinking about him, and everyone's hearing stories that they didn't know. They're getting purified by hearing about him. So you can see the benefit of separation. It intensifies meditation. And the other thing, which is so important for this discussion, is that the absolute nature of Krishna consciousness is difficult for us to fully comprehend because it's not logical that somebody is present when they're not present. And so sometimes we get caught up in that. Oh, I wish they were here. I wish I could be with them. And Prabhupada's saying, no, there's no difference. And for us, there is difference. But really there is no difference, and it's a question of realization. The Lord is present in his name. He's present in his remembrance. So These are realities which we have to realize, or we will realize in due course of time. And so we can't discount them because we don't realize them. And say, well, I never experienced that. Or when I'm with my guru, it's so much better than when I'm at a distance. But that's our realization. But that realization has some material impurity in it. So Prabhupada couldn't do what he did if he was not in the presence of his spiritual master. It would have been impossible. And in fact, he said that he always felt that he was with him. Which is interesting, because Prabhupada also said, I only met him maybe 6 times. So the one who only met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta 6 times became the most successful. So the one who only met him 6 times perhaps was one amongst those who carried him most intimately. So, and now, most of you have not met Prabhupada, but it doesn't mean that you can't be intimately connected, because his association is available through his service. His association is available through hearing his books, lectures, conversations. And you say, yeah, but you got to see him, it's different. Yes and no. Some people who didn't see Prabhupada are doing better in Krishna consciousness than those who did see him. Some of those who didn't see him are more intimately connected with him than those who did. So yes, seeing him, I wouldn't give it up for the world, of course. And of course it had an amazing impact on me. But just looking at it from, let's say, an academic perspective, there's no indication that one necessarily will be successful in their spiritual life because they have the association of an advanced devotee, because they have to carry that association in their heart and be able to follow it when they're separated from that person. And if they can't do that, it's not going to work. And if they can do it, then their personal association will not be necessary. And there are many devotees in our movement who have a very deep connection with Prabhupada. And if you hear them speak about Prabhupada or you hear them give class, you would certainly think they are Prabhupada disciples. But the fact is, they're not. But they talk about him as if they were with him. So what does that mean? It means that they feel that way. Interesting, isn't it? Okay. So. Okay. All right. Separation. In our. Okay, I'm going to put salt on the wound. I'm going to put salt on the wound right now by saying that separation is considered the highest position. That's where the most intense meditation and the most intense love comes from. And that's just something that we can't intellectualize fully or properly, but at least we can say that those you love live in your heart with you always. That is a fact. And so Prabhupada said the spiritual master lives eternally with the disciple who follows his instruction. So Prabhupada can live in anybody's heart. And when he does, that means we are connected with him. So we'll continue reading. The Lord extensively traveled all over the southern part of India. The great saint of Maharashtra, known as Saint Tukarama, was also initiated by the Lord. Saint Tukaram, after initiation by the Lord, overflooded the whole of Maharashtra province with the Sankirtan movement, and the transcendental flow is still rolling on in the southwestern part of the great Indian peninsula. The many Indians of that area, or for many Indians of that area, Tukaram is well known and revered. The Lord excavated from South India two very important old literatures, namely the Brahma Samhita and Krishna Karnamrita. And these two valuable books are authorized studies for the person in the devotional line. The Lord then returned to Puri after his South Indian tour. So a little history of Brahma Samhita. Lord Chaitanya found the 5th chapter, and then he had his disciples chant it daily in Alachua after Mangal Arti, following in this line or this idea. The devotees chant 4 verses in Sanskrit and read the translation of the Brahma Samhita. And Mahaprabhu said this should be recited every day. So before Bhagavatam class, when I was a brand new devotee, this is January 1970, before Bhagavatam class, Prabhupada had not introduced the chanting of Jai Radha Madhava, so we would chant the Brahma Samhita, some verses of Brahma Samhita. And we were told that Mahaprabhu said this should be chanted as a daily function. Prabhupada told us that, and so that's what we did. And then when the devotees in London had recorded the Govinda prayers, they had sent it to Prabhupada, an offering to Prabhupada. Prabhupada heard it, Prabhupada loved it, it really invoked his emotion and meditation on Brahma Samhita, and then he asked that it would be played every day in the temple. So that continued the tradition of daily reciting Brahma Samhita, at least some verses, 3 or 4 verses. And Krishna Karnamrita, as I remember, is written by Bilva Mangala Thakur. Karna means ear and Amrita means nectar. So the nectar of Krishna for your ear nectar. Ear, or what do we say? Eye candy, ear candy. In the world of audio, it's ear candy. And I think we normally say eye candy, right? See something very beautiful, it's eye candy. But in the world of audio, you get these speakers, it's ear candy. You buy this microphone, it's ear candy. Something like that. So Karnamrita is like ear candy, or a little above, a little more than ear candy, ear nectar. And so they're very deep books on the science of bhakti. And Prabhupada allowed us, said it was okay to read the Gaudiya Math version of Brahma Samhita, and the BBT published that. And I can't guarantee you will understand much if you'll read it, but one thing you'll understand is that you don't understand a lot. That much you'll understand. So sometimes there is value in reading what you don't understand to help you understand that Krishna consciousness is very deep and there's much more to understand. That will take time, not only take time in learning, but take time in becoming more Krishna conscious, so that you'll be able to understand, because you understand with your head, but you understand with your heart as well. So it describes the nature of the spiritual world, and because the spiritual world is transcendental, I'll just say, use the American phrase, it takes some getting used to. Like sometimes you say, well, this chair is actually better, but when you first sit in it, you won't like it, but it actually supports your back and posture. And so we'll say, it takes some getting used to, but once you get used to it, then you realize, this is amazing. I never realized chairs could be this amazing, or whatever the product it is. So the spiritual world takes some getting used to, because we're in a perverted reflection, and it's not limited to the 3 dimensions we have. So if you want to have some fun, just open up the Brahma Samhita, like to the middle, and start reading it. And then you'll understand what I'm talking about. And also, the language that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta used was directed towards intellectuals. So it's a lofty kind of language. So sometimes it's not even the topic that is difficult, but sometimes the language may require you have a dictionary with you, or try to enter into how he expresses himself. So that's my plug for the Brahma Samhita. If you're ever feeling like a need to just completely transcend this world and forget about it, which I hope that need is often and regular, you can take a look at Brahma Samhita. And there are also, somewhere on the internet, you may find lectures on Brahma Samhita to help explain things to you. And I don't recommend this for very, very young devotees. You should wait. But if you've been around 5+ years, you could venture at least to the shores of Brahma Samhita and see what you find. And I always find it very ecstatic to come across books that are difficult to understand, because it helps me to kind of position myself on the transcendental universal GPS, like, oh, I don't understand this. If I were more transcendental, I would. I have further to go to understand the Leelas and the geography of the spiritual world and the transcendental nature of that Swarup Shakti. So it's a good check-in sometimes, I think, to see how much I'm progressing, how much I'm understanding the transcendental. So that's my take on the Brahma Samhita. Okay, so we're going to read some more. On his return to Puri, all the anxious devotees of the Lord got back their life, and the Lord remained there with continued pastimes of his transcendental realizations. The most important incident during that time was his granting audience to King Prataparudra. King Prataparudra was a great devotee of the Lord, and he considered himself to be one of the servants of the Lord entrusted with sweeping the temple. The submissive attitude of the king was very much appreciated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The king requested both Bhattacharya and Raya, that's Ramananda Roy, to arrange his meeting with the Lord. When, however, the Lord was petitioned by his 2 stalwart devotees, he flatly refused to grant the request, even though it was put forward by personal associates like Ramananda Roy and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. The Lord maintained that it is dangerous for a sannyasi to be in intimate touch with worldly, money-conscious men and with women. The Lord was an ideal sannyasi. No woman could approach the Lord even to offer respects. Women's seats were accommodated far away from the Lord as an ideal teacher and acharya. He was very strict in this routine work of a sannyasi. Apart from being a divine incarnation, the Lord was an ideal character as a human being. His behavior with other persons was also above suspicion. In his dealing as acharya, he was harder than a thunderbolt and softer than the rose. One of his associates, Junior Haridas, committed a great mistake by lustfully glancing at a young woman. The Lord, as Supersoul, could detect this lust in the mind of Junior Haridas, who was at once banished from the Lord's association and was never accepted again, even though the Lord was implored to excuse Haridas for the mistake. Junior Haridas afterwards committed suicide due to being disassociated from the company of the Lord, and the news of suicide was duly related to the Lord. Even at that time, the Lord was not forgetful of the offense, and he said that Haridas had rightly met with the proper punishment. So, I want to tell the story of Mahaprabhu and Maharaj Prataparudra because it has a happy ending. So, Maharaj Prataparudra was the king of Orissa, which means he's the, Orissa, or king of Jagannath Puri, He's the king of Jagannath Puri. He's a devotee. And he was very dear to the devotees, and he really wanted to have darshan with Mahaprabhu. And so the devotees were asking Mahaprabhu, and he was refusing. And another devotee would ask. So many devotees asked, he refused. And then at one point he said, stop asking, and if you continue to ask, I'm just going to leave. And the reason being is that the injunction is that a sannyasi should never associate with worldly-minded people. In other words, as a sannyasi, he has to protect himself from association that could be contaminating. So sannyasis are very strict and very formal in their association with women, and they had no intimate association with women, of course, and they had no intimate association with worldly people. And king is like the emblem of a worldly person, so he wouldn't see him. That's not the way he was feeling in his heart, but he was setting an example. Because sannyas is something very serious, and Mahaprabhu, being all-knowing, knows that that ashram will be contaminated or potentially contaminated in the future. And he wanted to set the proper example. And that's why he dealt that way. And that's also why he dealt with Junior Haridas, who was also a sannyasi. He wanted to set the standard. And so he made sacrifices to set the standard. Although his heart, he wasn't happy that Junior Haridas killed himself. He wasn't happy not to see Maharaj Prataparudra, but it was part of the Leela. So he's instructing, this is the behavior of a sannyasi. And who's he instructing? He's instructing all the sannyasis, or all the sannyasis of the future, that you have to be very strict. And if you are engaged in activities which are not proper for the sannyas order, then you have to correct yourself or kill yourself. Of course, we don't recommend killing yourself, but this was a drastic measure. And at that time and that situation, we see that Mahaprabhu feels that that is the right example. So, as I said, what's going on in his heart is great affection for Maharaj Prataparudra and great affection for Junior Haridas. What's going on externally is a lesson. So he's sacrificing his own heart and desire and the desire of his devotee to establish dharma, the dharma of sannyas. Having said that, he teaches another story through Maharaj Prataparudra. And Prabhupada described here that Mahaprabhu was very attracted to Maharaj Prataparudra's humility because he saw Maharaj Prataparudra, who's the king, and he was sweeping the ground in front of the Jagannath cart, or as Prabhupada said here, sweeping the temple. And when Mahaprabhu saw that, he saw wherever there, not that this is not stated anywhere, but this is a fact, wherever there's that great level of humility, there's great love, because they go together. Wherever there's great pride, there's no love, or very little love, or they're antagonistic to one another. So when Mahaprabhu saw that humility, as we know and as we've seen before, that humility really melts his heart. Well, that's it, I don't know if you've ever seen these shows like American Idol or Britain Has Talent, but these people sing, they compete, and some of them, some of them are so good that when you perform music well, it melts the heart. So it's when the heart melts, then that's when everybody just ends up loving the song, and there's a change. So it was something like that with Mahaprabhu, not sentimental heart melting, but when this happened, his heart melted. Sometimes, things happen that melt your heart. Well, you have to see this video, it'll melt your heart. So, somebody helps someone, and it's very touching. So that's what happened. So this is really, really important for us to know that we can melt the heart of Mahaprabhu by our humility, and that we all want to be recognized. We like to show off. We like to be honored. We're happy when people appreciate us. We're happy when people think we've done something great. And here we're learning that Mahaprabhu's heart does not melt with our pride, but it melts with our humility, that I'm simply the humble servant. And all glories to my Guru, all glories to Prabhupada, all glories to the Lord. That's humility of the devotee. And that it's such a nice story to meditate on, because humility melts the heart of the Lord. And we can melt Krishna's heart by our humility. And if we're proud, then we see so many examples of where Krishna just leaves his devotee when he becomes proud, or just the pride, it gets in the way of the relationship. There can't be love where there's pride. And naturally, humility is love. I think that's the best way to understand humility. Just when you hear the word humility, just think humility is love of Krishna. They're not two separate things. And I think that will help you, inspire you in your humility. And Mahaprabhu, on the story with Haridas, showed pleasure, because Haridas, he felt, did the right thing. That better than fall down, kill yourself. Because if you fall down, you will kill your spiritual life, so better kill your body. As I said, that's a principle, not something we would recommend. But in this case, Mahaprabhu felt it was the right thing. And Haridas was inspired to do it because Mahaprabhu wanted it, and it set an example. So please don't kill yourself. If you take sannyas and fail, or you fail at anything, please don't kill yourself. Just rectify yourself. That's the principle. Now, as we've discussed before, I think I just heard, I didn't know there were this many sannyasis, but I heard there was something like 65 devotees who took sannyas from Prabhupada. Anyway, they're conflicting figures. And at least half or more didn't make it. And as we've discussed before, Prabhupada didn't reject them, didn't tell them to commit suicide. He was okay. So that's a great lesson also. Okay. They did what they could. They didn't make it. Okay, so get married. Continue to practice Krishna consciousness and continue to give Krishna consciousness. Wow, amazing, huh? Something which is condemned, Prabhupada did not condemn. I think it's such a good example for us. It's easy to condemn, and we have so many principles. If you want to condemn people, really the best place for you is a religious movement, because there's so many principles. So you'll have so many things to condemn people, so many principles, points to condemn people, and that's a challenge for us because it's a fact. It's natural tendency to condemn. Then you join a religious organization, you have more points of condemnation. And now we see Prabhupada's example. Okay, so take up your service as a grihasta, no problem. Don't worry about it. Don't look back. Don't lament. It's okay. Wow, that's a wow moment if I've ever heard one. If I scream or make faces when I drink this, it's a drink that has ginger in it, but it was the bottom of the bottle, And all the ginger's on the bottom, so that's why. I might make a funny face. I'll try not to, but it's hard not to make a funny face when you drink strong ginger. So we'll continue. I always check in with you if you have anything to say. And I hope not to miss anything. Okay. Kripanidhi Prabhu Ki Jai. Hare Krishna. So we have from Deva Smita. I always struggle to properly understand this pastime with Junior Haridas. If Lord Chaitanya is the most merciful incarnation of God, then why such a strict punishment to Haridas for begging some rice for his service from an old woman? And Prabhupada says he was lustfully looking at a young woman, which is interesting. I know he was a sannyasi and was setting some principles through Haridas. However, my doubt is regarding the severity of the punishment that he had to ultimately commit suicide. But see, the thing is, for a devotee, the greatest punishment would be to lose their relationship with Krishna, but he didn't lose that. So what happened? Mahaprabhu would hear him singing, and so Haridas is singing for me. So we have to look at this story in terms of rasa. The relationship never ended, but Haridas, his service was to set an example. And you could say that even the little fault that he committed was inspired by Mahaprabhu because he wanted this Leela. It was very important. So I think we need to understand it in context, that the sannyas ashram, if it's misrepresented, misused, will create havoc in society. And Mahaprabhu wanted to establish a very strict standard. So he enacted this Leela, but it never interrupted their relationship. So Thakur Haridas got to do that service. That's how we should see it. And their relationship continued, and he was just able to set an example through that service. And that's what Mahaprabhu wanted. So he's happy. We don't have to lament because he's happy. And Achyuta Ananda says, Vishnu Jan Swami's story is nearly identical. Vishnu Jan Swami was one of the first sannyasis in ISKCON, and he had questioned Prabhupada about what a sannyasi should do if he transgresses some principles. We don't know what Vishnu Jan Swami had done. I don't. To my that's not a word. As far as I understand, he really didn't do anything bad. It was probably more in terms of internal thinking, nothing external. But he was very, very pure, and he felt very bad. He didn't describe to Prabhupada what he did. He just asked Prabhupada if sannyasi is transgresses or does not act properly, what should he do? Yeah, the video is not happy. I don't know. It keeps changing. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. It could be a Facebook thing, or my internet is not happy. I don't know. And he asked Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said yes. It's an interesting story because when Vishnu Jan Swami asked the question, should a sannyasi kill himself when he transgresses and so forth? Prabhupada said yes. Why did Prabhupada say yes? Because in Prabhupada saying yes, he's saying yes, that is the injunction. So let's say you ask me a question like, if I engaged in this sinful activity, should I drink hot boiling ghee? And I could say, well, according to Manu Samhita, yes, you should. And of course, I wouldn't ask you to do that, but I would be just making a point. Well, that is the tradition, or that is the injunction, but we don't follow that. So Prabhupada saying yes was acknowledging this story or this pastime of Junior Haridas, that is the tradition, that is the injunction. And that's the message Vishnujan Swami got. And after he got that confirmation, then he walked back to the end of the morning walk. And then Prabhupada went on to explain that we don't do this. And he didn't hear it. He didn't hear that part of the conversation. So as far as we can tell, that he had killed himself. So I think this is extremely important, because sometimes there are injunctions in the Shastra which we don't follow, but we follow the principle, but we don't follow the injunction exactly. Then you may ask, why did Prabhupada say yes? He was just acknowledging that has been the tradition. That injunction is Shastric, and that has been the tradition. But then, in the second part of his answer, he was explaining the application within the context of the Krishna consciousness movement. So then you have two things going on here. You have an injunction, historical precedent, and then you have the application within the modern context. So this is an ongoing reality. And we don't want to make the mistake of insisting on a injunction that is not applicable to a modern context. So that's how Prabhupada was so amazing in being able to adapt. And so we say, the way we understand that is he kept the principle, but then adjusted the detail. And as we had discussed, I think we discussed on Friday's class, the main principle that was guiding Prabhupada was what would be the best for his disciples, what would be the best for people coming to Krishna consciousness, what would be the best to bring people to Krishna consciousness, and what would be the best for people who are not coming, who are are outside our radar at this point, so to speak. How can we help them? So that's how he put everything within that context. So he took injunctions within that context, and then some adjustment was sometimes necessary, sometimes not necessary. And as we said Friday, some things you can't adjust. It's just they are the way they are. They can't be changed. This is just how it's done. So knowing what you can't change, knowing what you can, and knowing how to change what you can, that requires some intelligence, some experience. And Prabhupada was so good at that. And I was thinking this morning, in relation to this talk we're going to have today at 1:30 Eastern Standard Time, there's an ad on my Facebook page somewhere for this. Do you know that when Prabhupada came to America in 1965, in India, women did not drive cars. Hardly anyone drove cars, actually, but especially women. So when Prabhupada saw women, he thought that was unusual. It's not that he saw women. When he saw women driving cars, he thought that was unusual. It's interesting, right? But, well, interesting, kind of funny for us, I would say, 1965, and no women drove cars in India. That's funny for us. But what's interesting is that when Prabhupada saw that, he didn't tell his female disciples, well, you shouldn't drive cars because in India women don't drive cars, and it would be unchaste if you drive a car. And he never said that. And not only did he see women driving cars in America, he saw women doing things that traditionally they didn't do in India, or at least they didn't do in his lifetime. Maybe they had done it at other times in history, but at least not anything that he saw. And what's interesting is he didn't try to change that. He didn't see a problem with it. And he kind of, as we say in America, go with the punches. If a situation is difficult, rather than fight it, you just kind of go along with it and use it. So he kind of went with the punches, and this is how it is. Okay, so we'll do it that way. As long as it can be used, and as long as it's not destructive to our Krishna consciousness, we'll do it that way, especially because there is no other way no other way would work. So whenever he saw a situation and thought that this is okay if we do it this way, or it's the only way it can work, then he would go with it. He wouldn't try to change it, wouldn't see a need to change it. Some things, yes, we would have to change. They're against our principles. But some things were neither for or against our principle. It just breaks tradition a little bit, but it's okay. So that was Prabhupada's evaluation, that if this is how they do things, and if I try to change that, I'll be going upstream. And so we'll just figure out how we can take this context and apply it in Krishna consciousness, because we can't change it. And he wrote about it in his books. It was that, the principle was so important, he wrote about it in a few places. So I think we need to take note, if Prabhupada is putting something in his books about his own experience, and not only once, putting it in several places, making the same point, we have to take note. And his main point was, he said, what works in India may not work in the West. That he was actually really not only addressing that to us, but addressing it to people who are criticizing him for making changes. And he said, if you don't adapt, you won't be successful. That was his point. So he was okay. All right. These boys, we gave them sannyas. It's not working. Okay, get married. That was an example. He never told anyone, any sannyasi who couldn't keep his vows, to kill himself, although that's the injunction. Right? So this is really important. When you get a little fired up about a certain injunction, just remember this story. Is this injunction absolutely necessary? Is this an injunction that very few people could even follow? If that's true, then to push that injunction down everyone's throat is not going to work. So it's important to remember that. And it's a sensitive issue, because we're trying to establish a culture, a different culture. But how far can you push the culture before people can't follow it? And then if you're trying to push a culture that people can't follow, it's counterproductive. We need this culture. Okay, great, we need this culture. But nobody can follow it because that's not their culture. So now you try to push the culture that people can't follow. It doesn't work. So Prabhupada didn't do that. He noted it. So it's an important point. He noted, you can't do that. Yeah. Okay, so now you have some comments here. The Ritviks told Vipramukya to kill himself when he left ISKCON. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's a good example. So Vipramukya Swami is no longer Swami. He left ISKCON and got married. And so the Ritviks said, well, you should kill yourself. I'm sure the Ritviks feel that anyone who becomes a guru should also kill themselves, because they're offending, in their world, they're offending Prabhupada. I mean, could you imagine that Srila Prabhupada came to America to establish Manu Samhita? None of us would have joined. Only a few very, very rare people would have joined such a traditional conservative movement, and could have created some unsavory situations. So Prabhupada was like, it's just amazing. I'm always amazed, never cease to be amazed, continually amazed. And Prabhupada's ability to adapt to a culture for which he had absolutely no experience, no connection. There was no internet, there was nothing. He didn't know about America. Everything in America was just new. And one devotee told me that sometimes Prabhupada would take the bus in New York just to observe life in America, to understand it, because this is where he was preaching and he needed to understand it. And it was, when you go to a foreign country, things are different. But coming from India, 1965, extreme, just like really couldn't be any different, America and India at that time. I travel the world now, and practically every country is like, it looks more or less the same. There's slight differences in architecture and obvious language and people, but the differences 30, 40, 50 years ago were quite drastic. You go to a country and they had cars made in that country. They didn't have cars made in Japan. They had, you go to Britain, there were English cars. You go to Sweden, there were Swedish cars. You go to French, Citroën, Le Bon, Citroën. They had, and so it's like you kind of knew where you were just by looking on the road. So, yeah. So Prabhupada comes, and it's like this culture, and the hippie culture was also new. It was Americans were having a hard time figuring out the hippie culture, and that's where Prabhupada was. And he just, I don't know, we could say that he just had such an eye of compassion that he was just willing to do anything to get the message in to their heart. So he was willing to adapt in any way and then give principles in bite-sized pieces. So I don't think we can underestimate the tasks. And I can't say if anyone else could have done it. We don't know. But I tend to think like that, or at least not have done it on the level Prabhupada did, because if anyone else came who was too rule and regulation oriented and wasn't willing to adapt the tradition as is necessary, they would have failed. And Prabhupada knew that that was the mood of some of his godbrothers, and that's why he was criticized. And Prabhupada explained, he said, the reason I did this is that we wouldn't have been successful if I didn't. So how do we understand that statement? Basically, Prabhupada's saying the most important thing was to give them Krishna consciousness. The most important thing wasn't the tradition, weren't the rules, regulations. And he said rules and regulations will come naturally. And it wasn't even that Prabhupada's ultimate goal was that we would all be culturally a whole lot different. In some ways, yes, but not entirely. That wasn't his mission. So his thought was, well, whatever you have to do to give them bhakti and get that in their heart, just do that. And as far as other cultural details are concerned, they're helpful if they can follow them, but if they can't follow them, they're not helpful. So why try to push it? And we all see how culturally conditioned we are. It's not easy. You just, your culture is, it's in your blood. So it's not something he really tried to change. So it's important to note these things. I mean, we know this, but it's just important to analyze it a little more. So Sanya Rupa says, I read somewhere that Prabhupada would hear Vishnujan singing after that, like Junior Haridas. I've also heard that. And Kripanidhi says, Chapter 2 of Madhya Lila, Text 104 states that Madhavi Devidasi was an elderly lady. Seems to be two conflicting statements here, yeah. I'm not sure why Prabhupada said lustfully glancing after a young woman. The story is Kripanidhi is explaining here, Prabhu is explaining. He was begging rice. And, which even makes it more telling that he's begging rice from a very elevated devotee who was an elderly woman. What's really the harm of that? No, but you're a sannyasi, you shouldn't. We have one sannyasi, maybe more, but one I know of, who does not write emails to women because he feels that it's personally associating with a woman. So he's very strict. So Mahaprabhu is very strict. about sannyas. But Prabhupada, he talks about this. He said, with sannyasis, he was very strict. But with grihastas, he wasn't like that because it wasn't necessary. Because the grihasta ashram, it doesn't have those same restrictions. So he was very open with grihastas, very open with the wives of grihasta men. But in the renounced order, very strict. So be careful, all of those of you who want to take sannyas. Read the story of Junior Haridas 100 times before you do it. Okay, so let's read some more. On the principles of the renounced order of life and discipline, the Lord knew no compromise, and therefore, even though he knew that the king was a great devotee, he refused to see the king only because the king was a dollar and cent man. By this example, the Lord wanted to... Now, I am going to guess that in the original translation, maybe it was shillings and pence man, and Hayagriva changed it to dollar and cents man because... Yeah, most of the movement was in America. Anyway, if you're interested in trivia, some of you could get the original Bhagavatam and read the introduction. If anyone has the original version, and tell me, if this paragraph, is it dollar and cents? Did Prabhupada say dollar and cent, or pounds and shilling and pence? By this example, the Lord wanted to emphasize the proper behavior for a transcendentalist. A transcendentalist has nothing to do with women and money. He must always refrain from such intimate relations. The king was, however, favored by the Lord by the expert arrangement of the devotees. This means that the beloved devotee of the Lord can favor a neophyte more liberally than the Lord. That's an important point. Pure devotees, therefore, never commit an offense at the feet of another pure devotee. An offense at the lotus feet of the Lord is sometimes excused by the merciful Lord, but an offense at the feet of a devotee is very dangerous for one who actually wants to make progress in devotional service. So, Prabhupada once told something that further explains this. He said, we've turned our back on Krishna, and we don't actually have a right to ask Krishna to accept us. That's interesting. As Prabhupada said, one of the meanings of the Mahamantra is, Krishna, please accept me. And now he's saying, you don't actually have a right. And then Prabhupada said, but I know my spiritual master is merciful, and by his mercy, he will petition the Lord to accept me. So there you have it. What the Lord can't give can be given by the devotee of the Lord if you please him. And the Lord is pliable to the will of the devotee. So ultimately, Prabhupada is saying that although Mahaprabhu externally gave in to see Maharaj Prataparudra when he saw his humility, here Prabhupada is saying it's really because the devotees petition the Lord. So where the mercy of the Lord may not go, if the devotee wants to give the mercy, that person will get the mercy. So the devotee then becomes more merciful, quote unquote, than the Lord. So, ladies and gentlemen, don't refrain from giving your mercy to anyone and everyone. Give your mercy liberally. That's important. Because if you want to show mercy to someone, Krishna will show mercy. In fact, I'm not sure who said it. It may be Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He said, wherever the devotee wants to whatever person the devotee wants to direct mercy, it's like It's like that's the Lord's target here. Here's the target, drop the bomb. Something like that. So I want to show mercy to this person. Krishna will show mercy. That's how Krishna. Where Krishna's saying, where do I show mercy? And the devotee says, oh, show to that person. So then that's where the mercy goes. So you can ask Krishna to show mercy to people. You can show Krishna these people and say, here, there they are. And by you also being kind to them, trying to help them, Krishna knows that you want them to advance. The Prabhupada used to say, or often said, I'm always praying to Krishna for your advancement. And when he would say that, I would think, well, if that's the case, then we can't lose this game here. If Prabhupada's going to pray to Krishna for me, or for you, or for us, then we're in. That's kind of like whatever handicaps we have, not a problem, because my spiritual master, who's standing next to Krishna, is saying, accept this person or give them mercy, and Krishna has to accept it. He can't say no to Prabhupada. Right? So, then you might say, but you're telling us to do that. Can't Krishna say no to us? He can. But generally, he won't. He will also show mercy to those you want to show mercy to. So then, Prabhupada takes this point and says, you get the Lord's favor the devotee can give you the Lord's favor, so that means the devotee is dear, and that means if you offend that devotee, obviously you can't get the Lord's favor, but not only that, because that devotee is so dear to the Lord, you, as Krishna says himself, you break his heart. So this is, this is the we have to see the context of why Shastra puts criticism as one of the most dangerous actions a devotee could perform, because the devotee is dear to Krishna. And if I criticize someone who's dear to Krishna, that is painful to Krishna. I'm making Krishna unhappy. And my whole life is meant to make Krishna happy, and now I'm making Krishna unhappy. If I can make Krishna's devotees happy, Krishna's happy. If I criticize Krishna's devotees, whether that devotee accepts it or not, he may forgive us, but it makes Krishna unhappy. And without the mercy of the devotees, without the mercy of Krishna, I can't advance in spiritual life just by a mechanical process. I'll chant so many rounds, or I'll do puja, or so forth. If you're offending a devotee, it just neutralizes everything, or it contaminates everything. So it's nice to remember or meditate on this fact that if I offend a devotee, it just makes Krishna very unhappy. And the principle of bhakti is to make Krishna happy. Whatever makes him happy, I should do it. I think we were discussing last week how Prabhupada said, if you can conquer attraction to women, you can capture Krishna. And then I thought, okay, if that's going to make Krishna happy, then okay, I'll do it. That should be our attitude. If that's going to make Prabhupada happy, then I'll do it. Even though it's difficult, or seemingly impossible. But the attitude of a devotee should be, but if this is going to make Krishna happy, okay, then that's all I needed to hear. Krishna, will this make you happy? Yes, it will. Okay, I'll do it. Krishna, if I refrain from doing this, will it make you happy? Yes, it will. Okay, I refrain. That's where our impetus is meant to come from. And in that sense, when that desire is strong to please Krishna, then nothing is impossible and nothing is difficult to give up. It's very, very important and very, very powerful realization. And because, we're conditioned souls, so it's all about, well, this is what I can do, this is what I want to do, what I can't do, what I don't like to do. We want to elevate that to, okay, I don't think I can do it, but Krishna wants me to, so let me try. Or it's hard to give this up, but if that's what Krishna wants, okay. We saw that a lot of times with Prabhupada. A devotee would be doing something, even a service, and they didn't want to give it up, and Prabhupada wanted them to do something else. And they would discuss with Prabhupada sometimes the reasons they didn't want to give it up. And some were practical, not just personal. And they would generally, I would say 99.99% of the time, even though they may not have wanted to do something, they would say, but Prabhupada, if you want me to do it, then I'll do it. The conversation always ended like that. And that's the attitude of bhakti. So that's where you get your most power. Okay, I know it's difficult sometimes not to criticize a devotee, because sometimes devotees do things which are worthy of being criticized, isn't it? Yeah. Or sometimes they do things which are not really worthy of being criticized, but it's fodder for criticism. So we take advantage because we have that nature. But it doesn't make Krishna happy. And so if our motto is, I want to do what makes Krishna happy, then we're going to get the power to be able to give up a lot of things that we found perhaps impossible or extremely difficult to give up. It's so powerful if you can do this and just get that in your heart. Well, Krishna, if you want me to do it, I'll do it. Okay, Prabhupada, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'd like to do this, but if you want me to do it, then I'll do it. That will empower your bhakti to another level. That's 6G bhakti, yeah, next generation, or 5G. Depends what G you're on now. John said, I think my share disappeared. So it's last week, when in the mood of doubt, I wondered why I read Prabhupada's books and why he wrote them. I immediately felt, because he loved Krishna and us, feeling past. But it feels like he is with us in his words, and here with your stories about him makes me want to do something for him. Yes. There's a whole movement which Prabhupada wanted to be the vehicle to bring Krishna consciousness to every person. So we have a lot we can do. Lifetimes of work. Sometimes I'm afraid I'm going to have to take birth again to finish all my projects. As soon as one project finishes, I'm like Ravana, 10 new ideas come to my head. But it's our duty. Prabhupada gave us this little baby called ISKCON, and now it's our duty to take care of this baby. So Ananda, Haribol Ananda. Ananda asks, how can we distinguish between an injunction that isn't relevant in the age and a rule that we can't follow just due to our weakness or ignorance? When to push and force ourselves and when to give ourselves some slack, because that's just now for this or not for this age. If it's in the Shastras, a devotee thinks he or she is supposed to follow it. That question is quite nuanced and subtle in the sense that it's going to depend on the injunction you're reading. It's going to depend on you. And sometimes even advanced devotees will have difficulty making these decisions. So, first thing I would do is contemplate. In other words, think about it. Think of the context of the instruction. How did Prabhupada use it? Is this an instruction that he's given only once or 100 times? I would be very leery of an instruction given once that you can't back up at any other time. It would seem not to be important. If that instruction Prabhupada said it 1,000 times, okay, it's important. It may require also discussing with devotees you respect, and, to clarify your confusion. So I'm not sure if this is actually an injunction that we're supposed to follow. The way I do that often is just look at Prabhupada's life and see, is this something that he applied? Is this something that he taught? Is it just one sentence in a book, or did he teach this regularly in his lectures, in his letters, in his conversations? Was he doing this? So if it's just something he taught in a class, we don't see him do it, it's probably like that, yes, we should commit suicide. Here's the injunction. Here's what the Shastra says about what you actually do. It's another issue. So you don't have these two issues. What it says, but how you apply it, if it's applicable at all. Maybe it's applicable in a world that's more Krishna conscious. Maybe it's applicable in India, maybe not in England. The second half of the question is, I think you're asking, what if I decide or understand that this is something I should do, but I can't yet do it? Then there's a couple of things you can do. First question I would ask myself is, why do I think I can't do it? Is that true? Is it actually true, or is it just that I'm afraid to face it, I'm being lazy, I'm attached to something that I need to give up to be able to do it, and I don't want to give it up. So you want to hit the question on the head first, to see where are my resistances. Because there's a difference between resistances that you can overcome and conditioning, which is preventing you from doing it. They're two different things. Well, let's use this is not applicable to you, but let's use the example of I read something where Prabhupada says, it's best one becomes a sannyasi at a certain age, and then I hit that age and then I don't do it. So I have to look at myself. Okay, what am I attached to? What's blocking me, etc., etc., and work on that. Or I look at my context. Well, my wife she's younger. She needs me. My daughter needs me, etc., etc. It wouldn't be the best thing for my service. So, or I'm simply not ready. It wouldn't work for me. So then when we can consider all these things, we make a decision, and then we understand why we made the decision. Because if you're going to make a decision not to do something, you really have to understand why you're making that decision. And when I mean why, meaning that is the best decision in this situation. Because once you understand it's the best decision, you can live with it. Even though it's not the best on the absolute level, but it's the best for you in that situation. So you realize, no, I can't do this. I know I should, but I can't. But you don't discard what the ideal is. The ideal is still there. This is what I'm shooting for. This is what I should do. But after analyzing everything and understanding myself and what I'm capable of doing in my present level of Krishna consciousness, then I can make peace with that so-called failure or lack of reaching the goal, but not give up the desire to keep pushing forward to reach the goal, but understand what my limitations are. Right? It's like you're a singer. Right? You have limitations. You can only sing so high and you can only sing so low. Right? And so, okay, hit the lowest note. Like I can't even hit like anything below an A or a G. G's like the lowest I can go. Then nothing comes out. I go, it's just the body. Or maybe I can take a singing lesson, get down a step to an F, and I can only go up so high. That's it. Okay, that's just how it is right now today. That maybe tomorrow I can go higher, but today I can't. So, and my voice teacher saying, you need to go higher. I go, okay, but today I can't. So I have to make peace with that. But I'm still going to try. This is just all situations considered. This is where I'm at. Make peace with it, and then you're okay. It's when you don't make peace with it, that's when you have problems. Right? Isn't it? Isn't it, everyone? You all agree? It's when we don't have to somehow make peace with it without giving into it. We give it our best, but we may have to give in on some way because that's where we're at now. Ananda, if this answer that I gave were not true, then we would have no possibility of spreading Krishna consciousness because everybody's not ready to be a pure devotee today. And everybody's going to have the same question that you have. And everyone's going to have to find their place in the answer to that question according to where they are so they can make peace with who they are and where they are. Now, when you take initiation, obviously you have some limitation there because you've made some vows. But until you take initiation, you have more wiggle room, right? And speaking of wiggle room, I have to wiggle my way out because we're going to chant japa now. So I have to say goodbye to all of you and Hare Krishna, and hope this class was helpful in some way. I think there were a few valid points to meditate on. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go Premanandi.